ready to start our next project, and this one is called Deco Gardens, and it is featuring Garden State of Mind from Hoffman Fabrics. It is a very kind of contemporary but earthy quilt. It is 66¼ by 82, so even though this picture doesn't look very big, it's a big quilt. We've got some flip and sew, we've got some strip piecing and applique. I'm going to show you that technique on how to make these fun, funky leaves. And it will just pop together for us. So let's talk about the fabrics I picked. So when I got this line of fabric, I was like, okay, we could do a fall looking quilt with this, or we could just do very, very modern quilt. If you look, we used some of the similar things in our urban grid quilt, which actually that tutorial is already up on our YouTube channel, so you can check that one out. That one doesn't involve any triangles or flip and sew. This one does. But I wanted to do a floral quilt, and I wanted it to be kind of modern and clean looking. So we've got some metallic speckles here. This is pretty much what I consider the main piece of the collection, is this huge floral. It's very impressionistic. You know, it just looks like a watercolor. So to showcase this, we use this as the outer border, and then we built all the colors in the quilt around this. So if you're trying to figure out how to pick fabrics for a quilt, always try to look at the focal fabric that you're going to use as your main piece, and then you can pull the colors out of here. You can see we have the cream and the teal and the gray and the tan and the peachy and the rust. All of those colors are in here, and by putting this on the outer border, it makes the whole quilt pull all those colors together. So that's the first, is the focal. And then we have two of these speckles. We've got the rust and the cream. The cream is obviously our background, so everything is going to be set against this cream. The rust is the binding. So this is just the binding. You're only going to see a very little of that. Then we've got the teals, the two woven teals. These are going to be our strip pieced leaves. They are really the only teal plus this inner border in the whole quilt. And we put the inner border out here so that this teal gets pulled out, because there's not a lot of teal in this fabric. So you need to balance what's going on in the center of the quilt with what's going on the outer edges. So we're going to use those for the leaves, and then this funky pixelated square print. I love this print. I don't know why. It's just very, very cool to me. This is going to be one of the flowers. Then we went through and we picked the really fun, bright, busy prints, and these are going to be our individual flowers, but they're always outlined by cream, so they have a resting space. This is the center of the one flower. This is another flower. This is going to be the center of another flower. And this is also a flower, I think. Not sure where this guy goes. We will figure that out when we go to cut it. Oh, there, it's another center. It's another flower center. There it is. So I hope you enjoy the tutorial. Like I said, we're going to go over flip and sew, strip piecing, fusible applique, and then how to put the whole thing together. But this is our intro to the Deco Gardens. And again, this is featuring Garden State of Mind from Hoffman Fabrics. So I hope you enjoy. Alright, so we are ready to assemble our Deco Garden. So the first thing I like to do is I always look at the pattern, I read through the pattern, and there's a lot of flip and sew. That is when you put a square onto the fabric and you sew across the diagonal and you flip it open. That's flip and sew. I'll go more into it as we make the project. But the first thing I like to do after I read the pattern is I could see like all of the rectangles, so the B and the C and the E and the F, all of these rectangles go with all of the white. So I like to pair things up so that I know I can just start laying things out and sew them. For the centers, there's A, there's B, there is D, and there's two D's, so 1, 2, 3 of them there, and then 5 there. So we have 4 of them, 4 different centers. The all of the A's get the B's, B gets the C, which is this one, and then 3 of the D's get E, and the rest of the D's get F. So now we can go ahead and we can start doing our flip and sew. So the easiest method to do flip and sew is to draw a line on your square. And a lot of us are taught just to draw a line from point to point. What I've discovered is if you use a ruler like this guy, this is the folded corner clippers. We have these on our website. It's a Creative Grids ruler. You can go ahead and put it on the back side of your fabric, and you align the top of the square, the side of the square, the bottom of the square, and then there's even a cheater line here you can do. So you're aligning 3 sides, and then you draw your diagonal line. You're still going to sew from point to point, but your 1/4 inch foot will go on that line. And when you sew it this way, they're very, very accurate. I'm going to show you over at the machine a second way using the Clearly Perfect angle on my machine and my 1/4 inch foot. But of all of my methods, this one is the most accurate. The one I'm going to show you on the machine is the fastest and still comes out fairly accurate. So I jump back and forth depending on how the pieces are going together. This one, all the pieces are big and chunky, so I'm going to go ahead and sew them over there without marking them this time. So first I'm going to layer them all up. I usually grab a big ruler and I use it as a tray, and I start just layering them up how they're going to be sewn. So now on these guys are only getting sewn on the 2 adjacent sides. So we're going to go ahead and line them up like this because they're going to get sewn like that. So I want to be able to pick them up and just run them through the machine and not worry about what direction they're going in. This also helps me make sure, like, I can look down the list and go, they're all right sides together. I can say they're all going in the same orientation. It does decrease how many mistakes you can make. Doesn't mean you'll be perfect, but we all strive to hopefully not make mistakes. So we're going to go ahead, we'll lay these up, and then I'll meet you over at the sewing machine and I'll show you how I'm going to sew those. So that's what they'll look like. So I'm going to go ahead and keep layering them up, and then we'll show you what we're going to do at the machine. All right, so now that we're over here at the machine, let me show you how we use this Clearly Perfect angle, and I have a QTools bumper on here. I'll talk about that after, but to use a Clearly Perfect angle, you can follow my video on how to do perfect seams. I'll link it below, and it shows you how to attach it to your machine. It's basically this piece of plastic, that cling plastic that goes on your machine, but it gives you a center line, a 1/4 inch line, which I then put a bumper on so my pieces butt up against it, and then a 1/4 inch line on this side, and then it gives you these 45-degree lines. So instead of marking all of our squares from point to point, you can just lay it on your piece, and this works much better with smaller squares than bigger ones because you have that much in real estate. I could have taped it. It's longer. It's 8.5 by 11, but I actually clipped it to work with my table. So the first thing you do is you put the square on the rectangle, right sides together, and you align the 2 outer edges. And then you put the top corner of the square under the foot, and I usually go past that corner just a hair so that my machine doesn't like chew it up and catch it below. You don't have to be right on the corner, you just can be a little after it. And then this part, this corner, I align on that center line, and then this outer edge gets aligned with the 45-degree lines. So now you don't have to mark anything. You can just go ahead and sew, and I usually am watching that this point stays on the center line. Every once in a while I'll look up to make sure the 45 is correct. But if you have everything aligned, it should just go through at 45. And so we just sew it on. And then once it's sewn on, let's do one more. We'll do this side. Again, just a little past it. Okay, so now that we have that sewn on, you can see I can just flip this open and press it. Same on this side, and then you'll trim off your excess. That saves you so much time because you do not need to mark every square. Now that being said, you're gonna see here, let me cut this inside out so you can see. The way I showed you where I marked the square and sew it, which I will do with this one, you can see it's a little off here. You can see that peach peeking out. It's less than 1/8 of an inch, so I'm going to leave it. But you do have a tendency to have this kind of happen when you use this, versus if you mark every square the way I showed you with the ruler. But this way takes twice as long as this one. And so it really depends. Like, I could also just tear this out and re-sew it. Let's look at this one, see how that one did. This one came out just fine. And that one came out just fine. So I would say like 85% of the time they're perfect, but then every so often you get a weird one like this where it didn't quite make it. And again, you can tear it out, re-sew it. You can leave it and leave your background piece. You can use that as a guide. It's up to you, but this is a whole nother way to do flip and sew. And let me show you how to do the marked one. Alright, so the other way, I showed you how I would mark them with the ruler. You would lay this on your rectangle with the small triangle pointing out, and then you would sew across from point to point, but this time your 1/4 inch foot goes on that. And you still, the biggest thing is to make sure this is aligned properly to the background square. And that would be how you would mark them and sew them. And you'll see that one comes out just fine. So either method works. It just depends on if you're in a hurry and you don't really want to fight with these. You can use this method, or you can sit there and mark all of them and use that method. Again, using this, I would say 85% of the time they're spot on, and that could just be my sewing. But when I draw the line, they're spot on just about every time. So that's how you do flip and sew, the two different methods. And let's get back to putting the blocks together. So once you've chain sewed all your pieces, I want to show you guys the Cutting Gizmo. We have a video coming out about this, but whenever I do chain sewing, or have to sew a lot of things, I sew them in a chain, which is what this is. And this has a straight edge in it, so you can just pop them right over the blade and break them apart. So, and I'll put a link below for the Cutting Gizmo. This is one of my favorite tools in the studio. My father-in-law used to make these out of wood years ago before this guy came out. And then when this guy came out, I could buy him and sell him when he retired. My father-in-law retired from woodworking. So, and you can see just how quick and easy this is. So once you get all your pieces sewn, you're going to cut them over the blade. Alright, so once you get all your pieces sewn and cut apart, we need to trim this excess fabric away. So you can flip it open and you can see, even without marking it, that's pretty accurate. I mean, it's spot on. So the Clearly Perfect angle works great. It works especially great for smaller squares. If you're getting bigger squares, the marking method is a better way to go. So it's up to you which way you like to do it. But to trim all of these, I use a line on my mat and I just align the bottom with the line and the top with the line. And then the second one, I do the bottom with the seam and the top with the line. And I'm going to just stack these up in rows, and then I'm going to cut them all at once, and it just saves time and effort and gets me moving to the next step faster. Alright, so once you get some of these lined up, you just take a ruler and your rotary cutter, and you're going to align the 1/4 inch line on your ruler on the sewn seam line. And then you just hold the ruler down tight, and then you can just pull those away. And voila, it's cut. So I like to cut both layers, and then I will press this open. So these are ready, but the other way you can do this, if you don't want to trim all of it away, you could take scissors and just cut out the center, leaving the background, and then when you flip this out, if your piece isn't quite accurate, so you can check them to see, you can use the background square as your edge when you're piecing versus the edge of this triangle. To me, it's just a little added bulk in there, so I get rid of it, but that doesn't mean that you don't want to do it the other way. There is no wrong way to do it. So again, 1/4 inch on the seam line, cut, gather, and they're done. And so we're ready to go and press these. I'm going to cut up the rest of them, and then we'll be ready to do the next half. Make sure to check the video from the phone to insert here. All right, so these are the flower centers, and I wanted to just show you real quick before I trim them up that you can sew all 4 sides on before you trim them up and take them over to press. So I'm going to line these all up like I just showed you, but just a real quickie. Just going to cut those off real quick to show you. Once you have it all trimmed, then you can take it to the ironing board and you can press this one out and this one out. And you don't want to go all the way to the edge, you just want to press that little seam, and then you're going to press out and press out. So I'm going to show you over at the ironing board how to press these. But so you can sew everything for those and for these. Alright, so we're over here, we're going to press these flat. I want to show you how we do that. We're going to flip open the triangle, we're going to use the edge of my iron and press into the seam. And then just repeat on the other side. And then come over here and do it again. That way you only have to come to the ironing board one time to press all of it versus doing it in steps. So we're going to go ahead and press those that way, and then the flower petals, we're going to press the same way, the edge of the iron into the seam, from the edge of the iron into the seam. I'm not really going out to the edge, and I'm not pushing out to the edge because I don't want to stretch the triangles. So I'll get all of these pressed and we'll be ready to make our flowers. Alright, so we have all our petals pressed and all our centers. And how these flowers go together is you're going to match the center corners with the petals. So these petals go with this one. And these petals go with this one. Those go with that, and those go with that. So we were going to lay out one flower for you, and then I will go sew these. So you use one center, 4 petals, and the 4 corners. So we're going to sew these 2 together, these 2 together, and these 2 together. And then I will show you how I press them and finish the blocks. But we're going to do that for all our flowers. Alright, so we have the 3 rows sewn. And how we press these, I'm going to flip them over here. So first let's show you the flower. So how I pressed them is I pressed these towards the center and these out, and then these towards the center. That way my seams will nest. And the reason I did that is this way I do have to press into another seam, which adds a little bit of bulk, but in this one you're pressing into 2 seams. So I opted to press out for this one, so there are no seams I'm crossing. Press in on this one because there's 1 seam only, and same here. So then what we're doing is we're going to put this together, and these 2 seams will be going in opposite directions, and they'll nest nicely, so you'll get a nice even sewn block here. And you can put a pin in at those two sections if you want, or you can just feel it with your fingers and hold it as you sew it. It depends on you. But that's how we're going to sew all the blocks. So I'm going to go ahead and get these all sewn, and then I'll be back to show you how to press these two seams. All right, we have all our flowers done, our flower blocks. So there are the stripe ones and the floral. And then my favorite, the plaids. And then finally the peach tonal with the subway tile in the middle. So now that we have all the flower blocks done, we need to finish the leaf ones. To make our leaf units, we need to sew one light strip to one dark strip, which I've done here. And then we're going to applique the leaf shape on top and trim it so that the leaf is two-tone. So to do that though, I'm not going to press these to one side. I'm going to press them open. And to do that, I use a strip stick and I use a purple thing. And the purple thing, I use it to open up the seam just to get it started. And then I use the tip of my iron and I just press it open. That will make my leaf lay nice and flat. So I'm going to go ahead and press the rest of these open. See how flat that is. And then we'll get our leaves traced and ironed on and cut out. So that's step one, sew the strips together. Step two, press the seam open so it's nice and flat. All right, so we are tracing our leaves onto the paper side of the fusible web. And I like using the Sharpie Ultra Fine Point marker because the nib of the pen is the same width as your scissor blade. And when I'm drawing these, I learned this as a drafting trick from high school. You look at where you're going and not where you currently are. So if I can't see where I'm going here, I'm going to stop and either move my hand. But I'm looking at, like if I'm drawing here, I'm over here watching it. I'm looking at the line as I go. And it sounds kind of strange, but you will notice if you do it enough that it does make a huge difference. Like if you're trying to draw a straight line, you look at where you go, not look at where you're drawing. So you're ahead of it and it'll be straight every time. It was just a little tip on tracing, because when you have to trace stuff, you want it to be, you know, you're tracing the line, you don't want to get frustrated. But yeah, that is a tip for tracing. Okay, now that they're all traced, you want to cut them out, but you want to cut them out roughly outside the drawn line. That way, when we go to press it down on the fabric, so here's the leaf, here's our fabric. We press it down on the fabric, we align each point on the seam, sewn seam, so that we get a half and half leaf like this one. But we want to make sure that we iron this down and then cut out on the drawn line, because what that does is it seals all your edges in glue, versus if you cut this out on the line, put it on the fabric, and then cut the fabric out, you're going to have frayed edges. It's going to be kind of messy. So the best way to do is to leave some excess, put it down, and then cut on your drawn line. So we're going to do that with all 17 leaves, and then we will be back and ready to press them down on their backgrounds. Okay, now that I have it ironed down, so there's the right side, there's the wrong side with my leaf, and the points are aligned with the seam. Then I take sharp scissors and cut. There are two camps on using paper scissors versus fabric scissors at this point. I use fabric scissors because it's much easier for me to cut the leaves out, and then I make sure I just get my scissors sharpened. A great tip for scissor sharpening is go to a place that sharpens fine chef knives. You go to the knife shop here in Phoenix. They do a great job sharpening them. So now that we have already sewn our strips, ironed them onto the back of the fabric, fusible, cut out leaves. So now the leaves are ready to go on the backgrounds. So you're going to take 11 of backgrounds and put the leaf on this way. And you're going to keep it a 1/4 inch away from the edge. And you're going to remove the paper by scoring the back. And then when you position this, you want to make sure you're positioning it at least 1/4 inch away from the edge. And so that's that one, and you do 11. And then you do 6 with the leaf. Gotta get the paper off. Alright, so this goes this way. Again, 1/4 inch away from each side. So 11 and 6, we're going to iron them down. Then you finish the raw edges. I just use a blanket stitch and stitch around it. So we'll get these pressed and I'll show you how to stitch around the leaves. Alright, so we're over here at the machine. I'm getting ready to stitch the leaves, and I'm going to use Aurifil 40 weight. This is color 2850. And it's just a really soft teal. And if you want to figure out what color looks best on your fabrics, you can just lay one thread over your fabrics. Don't hold the whole spool up, because if you look there, it's, I don't have the greatest light, but it's a little bit too gray if you were going, oh, it's not quite a match. But when you lay out one single thread, it's perfect. So this is the thread we're going to use. We're going to use a blanket stitch. On my Bernina 440, it's stitch 45, and it's a straight line and a bite, straight and a bite, straight and a bite. You need to use an open toe foot. No plastic, no bar, it's just open. And then on the open toe foot, there's a center line on mine. If not, you can mark one. That center line is going to ride along the edge of my fabric, and the bite will go into the applique shape. So we're going to go ahead and applique our leaves, or stitch our leaves down, I should say. Because fusible web, for most part, is just a temporary adhesive to hold your pieces in place. So if you don't finish the edges and you leave it unstitched, they will pop off. If you leave it like this and you quilt over it, you'll have, over time, the edges will fray. So doing a finishing stitch on the edge is great. A blanket stitch is a very traditional stitch for this. You could use a zigzag stitch if your machine doesn't have a blanket stitch. You would just go zigzag, zigzag, zigzag. You can also do a straight stitch about 1/8 of an inch from the edge, but that, again, over time will cause the edges will just eventually fray. So here we go. I'm just going to start at the point. These are really easy shapes. If you've never done blanket stitching, this is a perfect shape to start on. I'm going to go all the way around, come back, and go over my stitch, just one stitch to lock everything in place. So here we go. And you just go around the angle, around the curve. And if you have needle down, leave needle down on your machine so that you can then pivot around the needle when you need to turn. There we go. So we're just going to stitch all of our leaves down, so it looks like on the back, and then we'll be ready to put our blocks together. So now that we have all our leaves stitched down, I'm going to match them up to the blocks following the pattern, and then I will sew one leaf to one flower. That'll make that unit, and then I can sew all the units together to make column 1 and 3, and then these units get sewn together with this guy to make column 2. And then we're ready to put the quilt top together. So I will show you the quilt top when we get it all together. So I've got our quilt top all put together for our Deco Gardens. This one is featuring a garden state of mind from Hoffman Fabrics. I hope you've enjoyed watching the tutorial on flip and sew and basic applique. Let's get a zoom in here so you can see the leaves are all stitched. It's a really fun, easy quilt. It's a good one for advanced beginner if you're just getting finished, it is a good one if you're just moving from doing straight seams to wanting to do something with some angles and triangles, because you're not really doing triangles, you're still doing flip and sew. But I hope you've enjoyed this. It would be a fun quilt out of any collection, though I think the garden state of mind makes it a very sophisticated looking quilt. So let's get the quilt off to the quilter and see what magic Monica does with this, and I'll show it to you when I get it back. Here is our Deco Gardens quilt back from the quilter, all finished. Monica Chrome quilted this with floral. She did a custom so that the flowers would go around the pieced flowers. Let's zoom in here. She just did different floral motifs all around them. They're quite pretty. And then she did the crosshatch in the flowers. And then she did a large floral border to go in the borders. So this really does complement this quilt very, very well. I hope you've enjoyed our quilt tutorial. This is Deco Gardens featuring Garden State of Mind from Hoffman Fabrics. And if you've enjoyed this video, make sure you like and subscribe below, and thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, make sure you like and subscribe below. You can find the Whimsical Workshop on our website, thewhimsicalworkshop.com, and that has all links to all of our other social media platforms. Thanks for joining us.